Hi friends, welcome back to day 2 of the Wild Ones Erie Drift Plains Native Plant Summit. This gathering was created to share knowledge, spark curiosity, and connect people who care about native plants with the places we all live. Each presentation this week brings a different perspective, but all are grounded in the same idea. Small, thoughtful actions, when taken together, can support healthier landscapes and stronger communities. Yesterday, in day 1, we learned about the power of community in restoring biodiversity and consciously choosing and asking for native plants. Our first session today comes to us from Freda Tepfer and Stephanie Ciner. Freda studied soil science and has worked in various industries, including forestry, land use, hazardous waste, and pollution prevention. Her first all-native plant garden was planted in 2012 in Erie, even though she had a long-standing interest in native plants. Her quirky urban garden in Erie was the first homegrown national park garden in Erie County, and her counterpart during this interview is Stephanie Ciner. Stephanie is an urban grower at Wildfield Urban Farm. The farm's mission is to cultivate plants for food and beauty through ecological practices that are sustained by reciprocal relationships within the community. Originally trained in vegetable and cut flower production, Stephanie has increasingly added more native plants to her farm, including a meadow of wildflowers and grasses and a multi-species hedgerow of shrubs and native perennials. She also propagates native plants from seeds and cuttings and offers them to the public at her small backyard nursery and local farmers market. So before we dive in, I do want to take a moment to ground us in why we're here. The Erie Drift Plains is a place shaped by ice, time, and the local ecosystems that all call it home. And today it is also shaped by people who care enough to show up for the land and for one another. This summit isn't about doing everything perfectly, having the most manicured gardens, or knowing all of the answers. It's about sharing what we've learned, asking better questions, and remembering that native plants and the communities around them thrive through connection. I'm really grateful to be joined today by Freda Tepfer and Stephanie Ciner, whose work and experience help bring connection through native plants to life. And I'd love to start by asking each of you to share a little bit about who you are and about how native plants first found their way into your life.
I'll start, I guess. I grew up in New York City, but we had a summer house in New Jersey. But my real first formal introduction it might have been a seminar at the Botanical Gardens on Long Island, or it was my field natural history course at Cornell University as an undergraduate and going to their reservoir and looking at the wildflowers there. And I've been exclusively growing native plants since 2011 and growing mixed gardens probably since 1980 something. And I call my garden quirky because it's a lot of shrubs. And it's the first homegrown national park garden in Erie. And Stephanie is one of my chief gardening friends.
Thanks, Freda. Yeah, my journey towards native plants wasn't extremely straightforward. I grew up in like a very wooded area and spent a lot of time outside playing, but I wasn't that aware of plants. Like I could have told you a beech tree or an oak tree or something like that, but like the consciousness about plants was not there for me when I was young. And after college, I got into farming. So I was learning a lot about agriculture, but really had no awareness of native plants. I knew which plants were weeds to take out of a field and which were the ones we started in the greenhouse, as seeds. It wasn't really until starting to hear like the work of Doug Tallamy, he came to speak in Erie. I was kind of like, oh, like, okay, native plants are different than just certain flowers or something. And then really was Freda who kind of confronted me and was like, you're not growing any native plants. And that led me to look up, okay, what is a native plant and why would I grow like these plants in addition to or instead of some of what I already have? And then once I started getting to know the plants, that kind of like, it just went from there.
So has native gardening changed in definition for either of you since you first began, or does it still ring the same bell that it used to?
Well, for me, I've given up trying to have a pretty garden because the first year I had my front perennial bed, it was very pretty. But over time, things that want to dominate will dominate. And I just don't have the energy to fight them. And they're good plans, I have certain things that I I work hard to protect, but it's just not going to look like a super manicured landscape. And I've just given up trying.
I don't really have a label of like native garden on my space because there are plants and trees and shrubs and things from all over that grow within like the landscape that I take care of. But I've tried to be more and more intentional about like having meadow spaces. Like some areas have native plants integrated with some non-native plants. And even within that, I'm not sure which ones are exactly from like my county, this zip code, that kind of thing. So it's always an evolving journey to understand what's going on, what's growing, and what are the relationships with the plants and the soil and the weather and the insects. So I'm trying to pay attention to all of that. And that's probably what that term means to me. Instead of saying like, oh, I have a native garden, I think about it more in terms of how am I helping to co-create space for life in this land that I'm, interacting with and making changes to. And more that means encouraging species that want to grow there, that have a lot of relationships with the other plants and insects and have like a longer history with this landscape.
I really love that. Freda, do you want to go over kind of how you started your native garden? Because I know we have a couple pictures to share and maybe
Right.
like some of your favorite things about your native garden.
Well, when I moved here, there's a picture. There was just a cultivated dogwood and some little things. And so I bought the place in 2012. And by the fall, I ordered from 2 mail order nurseries in New York. And I ordered a pile of shrubs and knew that they were not going to be tiny, but shrubs can grow to 15 feet tall. So I have a lot of shrubs both in the front and the back. And I love the spice bush. I love the waviness of the branches and the flowers and the berries on it and the birds. I can sit here and watch from my window the birds eating the berries off of the spice bush. And I really love the blue cohosh and some of my little spring ephemerals that I have, and the hepatica and the lobelia. There are certain things that I really have to protect from the marauding asters and goldenrods and ironweed that, really want to take over the whole bed. Oh, and I love watching all the different insects. I really do. I have things like golden Alexander that starts early, and then I have my bush honeysuckle and my climbing honeysuckle, which is the last thing to stop blooming. And I just love, love, love watching all the different insects on all of my plants.
I love that. What do you think shaped your initial approach to gardening and land stewardship? And then I'll throw similar questions over to Stephanie.
Well, I lived in Washington State for 30 years. I worked for the Forest Service, and we had a lot of workshops in plant habitat types. And I moved to a 5-acre piece out in the country, but we were planting all kinds of exotics, just like Doug Calamy was. He planted exotics too. And then when I got to Walla Walla and it's a drier climate and I was paying more for water, I thought, no more non-native plants. And so it wasn't just economic. It was just, this is ridiculous to buy water to keep non-native plants alive. So by the time I came here, other than the peonies, which I tolerated them, and the blueberries and vegetables that I grow, and one non-native serviceberry, I just only have native plants. And over time, I really do try to keep it to not just native to Pennsylvania, but native to this region. And I use Bonap as a reference. And Stephanie and I have used Indigenous Landscapes, is that the name of it, as an information source. And I even bought some plants from him. And there's a Facebook group called Serendipity, and she's also what I call Catholic in her native plant philosophy. I just feel like I want to try to have the insects and the plants that belong here.
It makes a lot of sense. And then Stephanie, you had said that Freda was like, you're not planting any native plants. So did you get into natives mostly from Freda?
I would say that Freda was like a strongly motivating factor. like I knew that I was really into growing things. And I think the journey of that was bringing me towards my own ethic of like, now that I have my own small piece of land that's within, like, it's not in my control, but like I'm the one making a lot of the decisions about, is this going to be mowed, or, what's going to be removed and what's going to be planted here. My experience had been learning how to grow a lot of crops for food on land using like organic and fairly ecological practices. But at the large scale, I knew for myself, like in spite of the benefit of all the food being produced, it wasn't scalable to me having a very small piece of acreage. And just kind of like creatively and personally, I could tell that turning all of the ground into annual vegetables, it kind of like spiritually didn't bring me like the most joy, or I felt like there's more to this. So I think that the land and the plants and everything was kind of like teaching me some stuff that I didn't originally start out looking for. And that's where like Freda kind of found me at the farmer's market at the right time, where I had started adding a lot of flowers to my farm. And originally I was like, if it's not human food that I myself am going to eat or going to share with others or the markets, it's not getting planted here. Like, we don't want to waste our time. And then it was during COVID and I was growing more flowers, like your kind of traditional garden cut flowers, like bright colors. There are bees coming, there's butterflies coming, but people were so happy to see these flowers. And I was like, oh, this has a benefit beyond just like calories and delicious vegetables. This is bringing like some joy and some love and connection to our lives. So I was kind of ready for that motivating message of like, oh, if you want to support life, if you want to care and be more mindful of like ecological impact and which insects are struggling and which species aren't able to like propagate themselves because of human development, like all that stuff, I was kind of ready for it. And Freda didn't mess around. She was like, cannot support you unless you think about this. And I mean, I had to like think about it and be like, wait, am I really missing something super important and valuable in what I'm doing? And I decided that I was. And then I started, Freda provided some great resources to me to start reading and listening and learning. And yeah, like never gonna turn back.
I didn't realize, that she was kind of growing flowers partly for economic reasons. And I felt a little sheepish, kind of, oh dear. But, I got married years and years ago, but I'm not married anymore. But the person who provided the flowers for my wedding, they weren't all native plants, but she grew them all herself. And I just want to add, there's a person who works at our state park, and she started a group called Go Native Erie. I think that's what it was called. She came from being a production plant grower. She was not a native plant person at all, but she drank the Kool-Aid. I mean, that's the thing. I think once you get it, it makes sense. And sadly, nobody else on my block has gotten it yet. I'm waiting. There may be some people in my neighborhood, but I don't see anybody on my block changing what they're doing.
It's slow. I think a lot of people get into native plants for a different variety of reasons. The climate, your water use, just being a good land steward, it seems like in Stephanie's case, and then you telling her she should plant more natives. But you both have what you would term urban gardens. To you, what does that mean? Is it just a small space in a city with a lot of people, or what does that definition look like for you?
Well, my block is two different kinds of house. They're all ranch houses. Some have basements and some don't. And they were all built in the 60s. Most of them, I think, had a tree in the middle of the lawn. And, some things right up against the house. But that's pretty much how everybody is gardening on the block, except the one guy who has a little bit of a something, but I swear there's not a single native plant in his whole garden. So it's small, and the front is highly visible. The back, I get to do whatever I want. The front, I do what they call cues to care. So I do mow around the front strip, and I have not chosen to plant my hail strip or whatever they call it because Is this too much trouble with having to water it or people needing to get out of their cars or snow plow? I just said, just leave that in the lawn. So what it means to me is trying to coexist. And I was part of a group that got the city to change their definition of weeds because prior to that, one of our landscapers, whose wife used to be the county executive, the city made him cut down a meadow he planted on his property before that ordinance was passed. That would not have happened today.
That's really awesome. I love that you did that for your city.
I didn't do it. I was
You
part
helped.
of a committee, but I was like the final pusher in the last year or so.
And then Stephanie, what about for you? What does urban mean for you? You have a farm, right?
Yeah, it's technically a farm because I am growing for sale. And that's not the only reason why I'm growing. And it's really not like the motivating factor. But I grow plants and foods and all kinds of things on the land that I steward that isn't just for myself. Things go to market. I dry things to sell in later forms. And I do have some farm like things like crops in rows and like a greenhouse that I use, like a high tunnel grow in the ground. But my space is I'm like 7 blocks from the heart of downtown, like the city center. So I'm in a really densely residential area that was pretty early, like developed in terms of the history of like European colonization of the space that I'm in. And so there's a couple of things that really impact that for me. And one is there's the 2 lots that I have most of my growing space on. Those previously were buildings. And so there is the rubble of demolished buildings. There's old garages. There's old sidewalk. There's like, I don't know what's going to be under the ground if I dig a hole to plant, especially trees is where I discovered like, oh, if I try to plant a tree, I'm going to encounter a lot of urban, like residue of what was here before. That includes like heavy metal contamination and, like all sorts of things that just you don't experience out in a field in the country. There's also like a high density of people where I live. And so I'm trying to be really mindful of who all is interacting in the space, like human and non-human, but trying to make sure that the decisions I make are mindful of everyone who might be involved. And that includes like trying to plant a lot of like fruity things along the edges. So if people walk back through the alley, there will be like black raspberries and, some other nice things to see, but also maybe some milkweed. So you might see a monarch or it smells nice. And I know Freda does that too, just with putting beautiful berries along sides that might impact neighbors. So just thinking about too, and in my neighborhood, there are a lot of properties that are vacant, abandoned, that are not cared for by the landlords that own them. And so if you see a lot of goldenrod, mugwort, aster, et cetera, that is often a cue that like that's a blighted property. And when I'm doing my meadow, I'm trying to incorporate elements that would let people know as they walk by, like this space is desired to be here and has reasons for being here. And it's not because someone said, like, I really don't care about this land and the people who live here. So just like always balancing the different tensions and trying to encourage people to come through the gardens and meet the plants, but also in a way that's like safe and keeps like newly planted areas like not stepped on, just like navigating a lot of those kind of interactions within the city.
Have you gotten kids to like sort of informally help you, or do they feel like they're part of your thing?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, a big joy for me is sharing what I'm doing with, especially people who are interested, are curious, or want to help out. And throughout the years that I've been farming, a lot of neighborhood kids have come by. We have moved wood chips. We've planted trees. We've planted seeds. We've harvested and eaten a lot of things. And also just like looked for bees and butterflies and squirrels and things like that. I don't have like organized programs very often. I do occasionally have like, we've done a story time. We've done a couple field trips, a couple like work days where we could build beds or things like that. But mostly it's informal. And some of the most fun that kids and I in the neighborhood have had is like jumping in leaves. And one time I had a bunch of hay and we made a big pile of hay and just like threw hay at each other and, played in it, which those were normal experiences for me growing up like in a country environment. But there are kids who like 4 years later are still like, hey, are you going to do the leaves again? Or when are you going to have the hay again? So just being able to have like outdoor fun that's not work and it's not education, it's just having fun. Like those are some of the most memorable things for me.
And it gets them involved in nature too. So it should help grow their love of nature in the future.
I have winterberry, which is a dioecious plant. So luckily, when I bought my winterberry and my spice bush, I got a male and a female plant. And I purposely put the winterberry next to my neighbor's driveway so that they would get to, and it took, a number of years before they start producing, but I purposely put it there so that they get to see the red berries. And I also put next to the fence between us in the back, I put the clethra, which is a fragrant shrub. I have two of them, and they spend a lot of time with their family there. So I did both of those two things kind of to make them like my gardening better. But this year, the winterberry was just so impressive. So I don't do Christmas and I don't do Christmas decorations, but I figured that was my Christmas decoration this year, is having the winterberry like that.
It sounds beautiful. Freda, have you had any surprises as you've planted native plants in your urban space? Stephanie mentioned all of the rubble in her land because it had buildings on it. Have you encountered any surprises like that?
Well, a lot of the goldenrod I didn't plant. It just comes. And the late boneset, I did not plant any of the late boneset. That just showed up. I planted boneset, but late boneset, it's actually slightly different botanically, but very similar, but it's pretty prolific. In fact, I had to yank some of it out because one of the plants I truly love is the liatris, and it was threatening to take over one of the liatris areas. So between my driveway and the house, like right up against the house, I have some liatris that comes up every year by itself and some echinacea. But way back in the beginning, the Native Plant Society Facebook page was fairly small, and it's just gotten enormous since COVID. But I actually named the liatris after somebody from that Facebook group. And I think that particular one, it didn't flower this year, but liatris is something that some years I've had to protect from rabbits. When I first planted my shrubs, and this is really important, if you're, I don't have to deal with deer, but I got rabbits. So in the beginning, I had to protect my shrubs. And then in the wintertime, I realized because we get so much snow here, and even as the shrubs get to where the stems are thick, when there's a lot of snow, the snow gets the rabbits up to where the stems aren't so thick. I mean, I watched horrified from my bedroom window seeing a rabbit tearing apart one of my clethras. This year, I think I might have caged some of my blueberries, but I've even stopped doing the clethras. And in the growing season, I've had to protect the liatris from the rabbits. It's either the rabbits or the groundhogs really like the liatris. And I mean, there are some things they really like. I mean, one of the things that I've learned is I don't have much moisture in my garden. I have pretty dry, normal soil. And Stephanie and I both have had this problem with jewelweed, where we get lots of jewelweed coming up in the early season. And I may have brought the seed in. And then my jewelweed is within the tree canopy, so it doesn't have a lot of moisture and it just fizzles out. So I don't think I've ever had them flower. I almost did this year. If I want to grow anything that needs moisture, like I have things near my bird bath or near where the downspouts come out, but I have to stop buying plants that need moisture. There's no point. And the last thing I bought that wasn't native to Erie County was a lyre leaf sage, and it's gotten buried by the blue mist flower anyway. One surprise I had, which is something I planted toothwort, and I couldn't find it for the longest time. And then the leaves came up, and I swear it's been like 11 or 12 years, and it finally flowered for the first time this year. So I just thought it was gone.
And they came back and surprised you.
Yeah. So nothing's ever really gone until you're sure it's gone.
Stephanie, have you run into any urban constraints outside of the land that you live on with those surprises of heavy metal and rubble?
Well, I mean, the heavy metal kind of pushed me more towards native plants because in terms of best practices for mitigating that, it's like not disturbing the soil, like not tilling, not digging things up. And the more areas I have in like meadow or hedgerow or trees and shrubs, like the more stable anything like potentially toxic is. So then I can feel like, oh, there are additional benefits to choosing this for these spaces. I was shocked by the number and the diversity of insects that started to show up. And even with growing a lot of things that weren't native, I was seeing, just having like a big diversity of flowering plants. I was shocked. It was way more insect life than I'd even seen like on farms. Some farms I had been on that were like in the countryside. So once I started paying attention and noticing which plants they were especially coming to, and then trying to encourage more of those plants, like mountain mint by far is everybody's favorite. But also like when the elderberry is flowering, the elderflowers have so many insects on them. The milkweed flowers have so many, and so many other things as well. But just getting to see that insect life and like wasps I had never seen before and bees, I was just blown away and it was so cool. So that was a very positive surprise that encouraged me to keep adding more different kinds of plants.
I love that. So for someone who feels like their yard is too small or they live in a city that's too populated, too urban, what would you guys want them to know?
Plant anyway.
Yeah, plant anyway. But one of the things I've been noticing is the birds, like they've been trying to harvest some things, and the juncos, they can't quite maintain themselves on the plant. So plant densely. Again, maybe put it in the backyard if you're afraid to have it in the front. But take a little piece and plant a bunch of stuff. It's okay to have them too dense. You can always thin them. But if you look at how things grow in a native area, they are fairly dense. There's some areas in the county that are like ironweed and asters and goldenrod, and, they support each other. But yeah, do it in the backyard if you're afraid to have it in the front. And again, if you can do something like I did where I had something really fragrant or something really special, I stop people and I say, hey, can I show you something? And I show them the spice bush berries. I show them the witch hazel flowers. They're especially fun to look at. But I show the mailman stuff all the time.
And Stephanie, for you?
Yeah, and you can start with the container. I know Fred and I both grow a lot just in the ground in our yards, but I've lived in an even denser city before where there was no yard really to grow much in. And it's amazing what you can grow in containers. It's really just somewhere to start. You could grow one plant in one pot and just get to know that plant and maybe choose something that appeals to you, like the color or the fragrance, or maybe it is edible. There are many edible native plants that you can use for the leaves or for the flowers or for the berries. So whatever it takes to start building a relationship with something, a lot of life can be supported just from really small efforts. And there's really nowhere that's like impossible to try something.
The Pennsylvania DCNR has a bunch of plant templates for native plant templates. And there's another group, the name is escaping me right now, but they have native plant templates also, especially one that is a container garden. And so there's a lot of places that you can go to see inspiration for container gardens.
I love that. And just starting with one plant does sound like the best. I often say that milkweed is a gateway plant because it gets everyone like save the monarchs. Do you guys have a specific favorite like gateway plant that you're like, oh, if you're gonna plant one plant, plant this?
Mhm. Well, lobelia is impressive. Serviceberry, you got to wait a while, but it really, really attracts birds. It brings a lot of birds in. And the witch hazel, like I said, is kind of neat. But those are shrubs, so those are not short term.
Can be whatever plant you want
Yeah,
them to
I
be.
feel like it depends on the context.
Right. Ironweed is another really neat one, but it's huge. Monarda and the pensimons, those are very gratifying plants right away. And Liatris is real good. Like the northern sea oats.
I do. Yeah, Freda got a lot of the ones on my list. I would say, like, yeah, Monarda and any of the mountain mint, serviceberry, elderberry are great. But yeah, the northern sea oats is one of the first seeds that I got from Freda that I grew, and everyone just loves them. Like, they look amazing any time of year, and they're beautiful to use in like dried arrangements or things you can bring some into your house. But I really just love seeing them out there, even in the snow. They're like coppery and they're waving around in the snow. The cut leaf coneflower, really tall, so might not be for everybody, but the greens are edible. So I first encountered that plant in kind of like a foraging, like what are some indigenous foods? And then started growing them. And they did take like 2 years to really establish, but now they're out there and they're really beautiful.
Oh, and
So
they
yeah.
will spread anywhere. One shrub that's really beautiful in every season is nine bark. It's a pretty fast grower. I think you have some, right, Stephanie?
Yeah, it grew faster than I intended. My house, when I got it, had Japanese barberry around the house as the landscaping. And so it was a lot of work to pull those out. I haven't pulled out that many things. I kind of do more like easy and peaceful methods of just tarping something or just like chopping it down every year and putting other things around it. But the barberry involved like my dad with his truck with like chains. It was like a whole thing. But I wanted to put something else in there that would be like landscape looking and kind of be nice against my house. And I put in these little 9 bark. They were like, like the ones you get for free that are 12 inches tall, like a little pencil. But 3, 4 years later, they're huge and they're kind of like blocking the visibility from the street. So we'll see. I probably won't do anything, but I might take one out and rehome it or do like more intensive pruning of them. They're so beautiful though, like Freda said, all year round.
One shrub like plant, I don't know if it's really a shrub, that I keep trying to get to grow successfully and it might work in that spot for you is New Jersey tea. But one thing I've done, I've planted around all of my shrubs, I've planted Pennsylvania sedge. You can buy it from Ernst in flats of 72. And I just thought it would be a good thing to do. And it's not the only thing growing around them, but they're so cute when they're flowering.
I have not seen one flower. I will have to look for that this summer. Do either of you living in an urban space ever worry about what you will do when you run out of space? I know, Freda, you had said that you're running out of space to plant all the ones you want to plant. What do you do then? Do you just keep growing plants and make room for them?
Well, I have a bunch of plants I bought last year and they're sitting in temporary storage. So I have this silverweed, it's a nice little thing that if I did plant the health strip, it might do well there. But it's too successful. But I mean, that would be one thing is I could try to reclaim that bed. And that's where the creeping phlox, the moss phlox is. And there's a little bit of columbine and some other stuff. I have a bed that is all asters, New York asters and New England asters, and I could take that, dig them out and take that over and hope that the driveway plow guy doesn't bury them every year. And a couple of people said they buy some of them from me. I think I gave you some. Did I give you a few still?
Oh, of which one?
The ones that I got from the watershed people.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
Yeah, we've traded plants. Sometimes I trade Steph for tomato stars. She grows tomatoes.
Good to have a friend.
Something that has happened for me is like, as I've used a lot of the spaces that I had, I mean, there's still always like nooks and crannies to tuck things into, but I've become more and more interested in propagation. So, like, learning how to start different species from seed, how to take cuttings. And that's given me an outlet for some of my like putzing around with the plants energy. Like, once the plants are doing their thing and don't need as much care. And what's also been really cool is then being able to promote those plants for people to try and, like, if people come to my nursery to get tomatoes and peppers, I'm like, oh, do you think you'd want to consider, like, there's this native plant area. A lot of these need less water. You won't have to replant every year. So just trying to like gently encourage gardeners to consider native plants. And then I'm also always keeping an eye out for, there's a lot of what are considered vacant lots, in my neighborhood. They're not vacant. There's like lots of things that grow there and people use them sometimes for different activities. But I'm really hopeful that in the future, some of those spaces will also become, whether it's a meadow or just allowing more plants to grow naturally without mowing every week. So like I kind of try to expand my thoughts to other properties that aren't mine, but that maybe would be amenable to like doing some native gardening on those spaces.
There's supposedly an urban greenway happening on your side of town, but I don't know if that's ever going to happen or not. And they were taking over a lot of those vacant lots.
Yeah, we'll see. We'll see what happens.
I have actually been busted by code enforcement twice since the ordinance. And I think it was somebody, well, one time I'm almost positive it was somebody who was angry because I turned them in for burning, illegal burning. And they weren't just illegally burning, they were illegally burning in a way that, was smell and way too much smoke. And I actually had the city arborist there and a member of the city council kind of to defend me. And the second time I was accused of having too tall a grass, which is just ridiculous. It was just before I was going to be gone for an extended period of time. And I actually mowed the lawn before I got the letter. But the letter said, if you don't do this within the next number of days, I would have been gone. I would have been gone during that time. And it's kind of amazing because there are people who are growing stuff over their sidewalks and you can't walk on them. And my friend who's blind has trouble dealing with them and businesses. And so there's inequality. They are doing things that are harassing residential people, especially poorer people. I mean, I'm not rich, but I'm not poor. But there's a lot going on the side of town that Stephanie lives in that's harassing people over things like grass height and stuff, whereas they're not harassing businesses that don't maintain their sidewalk or block them off and stuff. But I mean, that was a surprise I got. So I have, like I said, I do this cues to care thing where I do mow the perimeter in the front. And especially, I mean, if I wanted a place to put more perennials, it'd be right there in the front. Trouble is, I have a line of bayberries. And sometimes I wait 3 weeks to cut my grass. Within those 3 weeks, the bayberry starts are this high. And so if I tried to plant perennials there, I would be fighting forever. So it's that, I guess that was a surprise, is the way those bayberries behave. Nothing else is quite that aggressive in sprouting. Yours aren't old enough yet, Stephanie, to do that, right?
Yeah, no, my bayberries are they don't take up a lot of space yet. They're getting themselves established. They also are kind of close to like a big oak tree that's on the street. So I think that anything in that area, it's like whenever you're designing your space, thinking about what else is already like deeply rooted and shading and using water and things like that, which I kind of was using on purpose because Freda warned me about the bayberry takeover. So it's like, I want to have bayberry, but I want to have a lot of other things in there too.
I fortunately live in an area where we don't have a lot of codes or issues. I live very rurally. So the whole conversation around codes is one that is new to me. So Stephanie, have you run into any issues with code enforcement or someone just saying they don't like your plant where it's planted or anything like that?
I have not. And I think that there's a lot of factors, like in context to where I am and what I'm doing. But the work that Freda did, along with the groups that were working for years and years to make sure that there was policy passed that allowed for the growing of vegetation above 6 inches in the city, like having that really helped me to move forward with doing some of my projects, the hedgerow, the meadow. I didn't even mow before the meadow actually was converted to meadow. There were 2 years that I left it grow into tall grass that formed seeds and all that, which is very much not allowable by the code. But having the policy to go back on to kind of say, hey, if someone would come here with a complaint or a ultimatum, like you mow this all down or you get a fine, I knew exactly where to go thanks to the work of people who went to council and advocated and worked with writing. I've been ready for someone to be like, yeah, I have a problem with this. And not even just the native plants, but I have a greenhouse and I have things that you don't see a lot where I live. But there's also a lot of other things going on where I live that you don't see a lot. And I kind of keep an eye out and I'm like, okay, there's many code violations in the region. There's garages decomposing. There's all kinds of things. So that makes me feel more comfortable that my garden isn't the highest priority of property maintenance. And sometimes that's actually a big issue when people's housing is unsafe. And I wish that they would come and enforce the laws, but I don't want them to come and tell me I have to cut down my plants. So I guess my biggest takeaway has been to try to be deeply aware and observant of the entire space where I am and making decisions that are not trying to blatantly be offensive to people's sensibilities. I also mow very conscientiously along my sidewalk. And I try to talk to anyone on my street who is interested. Most people are very interested. I haven't had anyone be oh, why is it like this? Which has been nice. And there's not a lot of extreme landscaping in my neighborhood. It's mostly people mowing and that's it, maybe planting a few things. But having food growing there to share with everybody really helps with the goodwill. Instead of me giving all the explanations why a native plant has this ecosystem benefit for this bee or something, that's not always going to resonate. But having a delicious berry or a pawpaw or something that smells good to be hey, this is growing here. Do you want to take some home? Or would you like some seeds? It kind of gives that sense of this is an asset rather than something that's perceived to be ugly on the block. And I collect people's leaves and grass clippings and stuff, which I hope also kind of conveys a beneficial sense of a relationship of how things people view as trash can be used for the garden. And yeah, I haven't had problems with code. I do try to keep an eye out and go along the edges of where I live to see what it would look like from their perspective, when they're driving down an alley or driving down the block to see, does anything look really problematic for an urban residential neighborhood? And if it does, then I move it out of sight. So there's a lot of compost, a lot of brush piles, and a lot of really tall things, but they're not right where you see them from the street.
I have in my front the PSU Master Gardener Pollinator Friendly Garden sign. And it's very faded, but I have also a watershed friendly sign that I got from the watershed stewards. And they're both right next to the bayberries. I make sure I mow certain paths, in the front between the shrubs. And I do some pretty intensive thinning and pruning of the shrubs periodically because I don't want the city to say it's a hedge because there's a whole bunch of regulations on things that are hedges. So I try to make it not be continuous. And then also, in terms of another surprise is looking out my front window to the west, it's all shrub. I make sure that there's a clear view to the front door and also a clear pathway to the front door. But sometimes I think, should I be worried that you can't see out from the west? But I think this is a safe enough neighborhood, but it's really pretty grown in here in the summertime. So this summer I did a lot of pruning, especially with the bayberry and the spice bush. And I gave some of the stems to Stephanie to take home for the leaves, for the fragrance.
I do love that. So there are two generations, not between you guys, but you are both from a different generation. How do you think that changes your perspective on native plants? And I guess, Stephanie, you've already mentioned how Freda has done so many things that you're grateful for, like with the legislation. So has that changed or determined a path forward for you? Or Freda, in your case, was there a generation before you that was native plant aligned? Or do you think like your generation kind of spearheaded it?
I'm sure that it's always been there to some extent, or there wouldn't be any businesses at all. But like even Doug Calamy used to grow non-natives. Stephanie, I'm not sure what she's doing now with school kids or not, but I know she's done a lot of work in the schools. And I mentioned last time we spoke that I felt like I knew everybody who was doing much with native plants. And now I really don't. I find out that somebody's doing something with native plants and I didn't even know about it. And that's a good thing. That's a good thing. And of course, if they were people younger than me, and some of them are, it'd be better than if they were all us old farts, who are retired and have more time. I'd love to see the paradigm of what is a beautiful landscape or what is an appropriate landscape, the reduction in lawns. I'd love to see that change. I think the plant of the year this year was one of the mountain mints, and butterfly weed also one plant. So it's neat that they are picking natives. Hopefully they're natives and not nativars. But I think it's great, and I may not live to see the paradigm shift, but I hope it does. I tried to talk to the guy who does the mowing next door, and he didn't want to know anything. He didn't want to know anything. One landscaper I talked to was interested, somebody who's mowing next door, and I gave him a booklet from the watershed stewards. And I know that the watershed stewards did do some kind of workshop for some landscapers, but I'd love to see the two turf companies disappear. I think they're doing great harm to the ecology. I'd like to see them have a different way to make a living, helping people landscape.
I think that's a great goal. And Stephanie, what do you think you've learned from prior generations and then bring in from your generation to maybe teach future generations?
Yeah, this is a cool question. I feel like there is so much to learn from like the generations of knowledge and wisdom and like people who have experienced the land in which they live for a long time. Something that I wish I had more of was that, from people. A lot of what I learned is from books and from the internet and social media, and then just like being outside and discovering plants and being like, okay, I now have to identify this on my phone, and now I'm going to go read about it online, which I'm also so grateful for those resources. But I'm not walking the meadows with elders who are telling me about each of the plants. And that's just kind of current situation, I think. And there's like many ways to look at it. But I am very grateful specifically to Freda for bringing this to my consciousness and then like supporting me with, hey, come over and see what I'm doing in my yard. Hey, take home some seeds, sending me articles, sending me resources. Like I feel that anyone of any generation can be that kind of support for other people. And my own approach tends towards being, I am really interested in like what lights us up when we go outside and encourages anyone of any age, but especially the generations who are extremely tuned in to phones and technology. And it's like hard to pull away from that, to build the connections with plants and animals and like the world around us. And then a lot of times the world around us is full of not a lot of life, or it's not easy to see right away. We've built a human environment that has a lot of buildings and asphalt and cars, and that's its whole own thing. I could do a lot about that. But just trying to encourage some, like I'm in the generation I'm in. I do have access to some land and some resources and can propagate plants. Before I moved to Erie, I had never lived anywhere more than 1 year, like one season, except for my childhood in which I lived in the same house, but like wasn't actively gardening. So when I was in a more transient life, what was so helpful for me was to just meet people who knew something about plants. And maybe it was a sunflower or an okra plant or a tree, but just like getting to be in the world and knowing that some people had a relationship with a plant where they lived taught me so many things. And now I'm trying to do that in like a very kind of like organic and casual way where I'm obsessed with all these plants and like learning about them and, getting to know their life cycles, getting to know like all these things. And when I interact, especially with like folks who are younger than me, there's usually a lot of curiosity and a lot of interest. And many of the kids I've worked with or met, or even adults, teenagers, like haven't gotten to observe a caterpillar before or a bird coming to eat a seed, or like there's so much curiosity about that or about like why this is doing this, why that's doing that. And just being able to be around for that, like taking time to sit down and watch things and talk about them. And like that's what I hope to offer to others. And that I love that people offer to me and that the landscape offers, even if there's no humans involved. Like there's always an invitation to go out and like get to know the plants.
I do love that. I have the fondest memories of fireflies when I was a child and then wanting to bring them back as an adult. So I totally understand how we're hopefully shifting how children see the world without things disappearing like they kind of had for us. What role do you think your visible, lived in native gardens play in shifting your community norms? I know you do a lot of education, both of you, with your outreach and going to markets and telling them to plant native plants. But how does just seeing your yard, how do you think that shifts mindsets towards natives?
I don't know who else in the neighborhood has had any impact from my garden. I keep trying to show people stuff. I know more and more people Stephanie's age or younger or a little older who are buying houses. It'd be interesting to see some of them don't have garden space at all, but what kind of gardens they have. If something really fun is happening in the garden at a particular time, and because we have a lot of walkers in the neighborhood, and families and stuff, I'll say, hey, do you want to see something neat? And I'll show them something. I'd love to say somebody else in my neighborhood there is one person around the corner, but I don't think I had anything to do with it. I think they were doing it already.
Well, I will say within the native plant community, you are highly regarded. And I had heard about you before I even reached out to you for like this summit and knowing you for native plants. So you are making waves, even if they're just within the native plant community.
I can confirm it's not just within native plants because Freda does a lot of advocacy for a lot of like really important issues in the community and has been for a long time.
After I retired, I did try to work for pay for a little while. And I don't have a lot of money in my retirement. I think I'm okay. And so my advocacy, my native plants, everything I do is using attributes of my personality that were liabilities when I was in the work world. So it's just so rewarding to be able to have people say things like that to me.
You're a treasure and a wealth of information, and I love it. I have two more questions for you. So what changes would you love to see in how cities support native landscapes within the next 5 to 10 years?
Well, along with some other people, I got the Water Authority to do a meadow with significant help from Greg Sidzierski of Ernst Conservation Seed. He did all the work, basically. But I'd like to see more of that. And I've heard talk of that happening, but I haven't seen it. I'd like to see more examples. I'd like to see the city do more. I'm so tired of the daylilies. And I'd like to see Gannon and the city get rid of all the butterfly bush and the, that red thing, the red bush in the fall. And, I'd like to see some entities set an example by not planting invasive non-native.
I think those are great goals. What about you, Stephanie?
Yeah, well, I would love to see large trees not being cut down, unless they're like Bradford pear or something, then we can have a whole campaign. But more planting of trees and less mowing of grass. And not like I'm not really speaking to homeowners, although that's also like an area where many people might realize they love mowing less and having more diversity of life in their spaces. But from more of like a city initiative, from a place of power, there are so many acres in the city that are just grass being mowed like week after week after week in areas where no one even walks on that grass or plays on it or uses it positively in any way. And if there could be some initiatives that also are helping to provide employment and skills and like benefits to humans while trying test plots, in some of our parks or on some of these grassy spaces of meadows or of forests, orchards, like I'm kind of a generalist in terms of like we could do anything other than have this grass. It doesn't all have to be the same. We know what some of the best practices are. We know what some of the species are that support like the most other species, but just emphasizing like less grass mowed and more other plants growing and including food. Where I started with growing plants was like, I want to grow to help feed myself because then that's food I don't have to purchase. And it's also getting to know what we eat in a way that's not just this is the item that I'm like about to eat from the plate, but it's getting to know the plant or wherever the food came from, what living being was part of that process.
The city set up a stormwater ordinance a few years ago, and they kind of took something through the consultants and they set up categories. I think there's 3 residential categories. So it doesn't matter what you got growing. I'm paying $36 a year and I could have all the impervious surface I want. And I'd still pay $36 a year. For commercial properties, it's a little different, but there's impervious surface and there's everything else. And really, grass in a stormwater ordinance program shouldn't be treated the same as trees and something else. There's a profound difference in how a complex vegetation system deals with stormwater and the amount of chemicals that they put into from grass, although those kind of grass areas are probably not fertilized. But it would be nice if we could, and we do have a new mayor, and maybe we could get them to take another look at those aspects of the stormwater program. Stephanie dug up a big blue stem from my garden because it was taking over the bed where the reactress is. And so she knows how significant the root system of a native grass is compared to grass. And, because we've all seen pictures of it, but Stephanie knows.
I did not realize the extent of the root system until I was like there for 30 minutes with a shovel. And I'm like, I'm not even getting close to where these roots go down.
Did it survive?
I actually moved towards using a chainsaw to like separate the main root ball into pieces. And I don't know how it was for the other people who got pieces, but I planted one piece and it's still alive. It didn't grow a whole lot the year after transplant, but it had an extremely traumatic removal from the ground and then being chopped up with a chainsaw. So, I mean, it's still alive. I think it's just needs to like reorient itself.
Well, the phrase, the first year they sleep, the second year they creep, and the third year they leap. And that's more or less true. Some things move faster and some things move slower.
For sure.
We'll expect updates on your little blue stem.
Big blue stem. No, big blue stem.
Big blue stem.
Yeah, no, I love my little blue stem. I would have loved to have had the big blue stem, but I had no idea what I was getting into.
And I have one final question. If your garden could leave one message for the next generation, what do you hope it is?
See, you could do it this way.
Yeah, like look what's possible. Like look how much life wants to live.
Come and see my bees and moths, and I said, oh, those little guys, I have no idea who they are, but they're so much fun to watch.
Yeah, that would be another message. Like, you don't know how fun it is to watch a caterpillar or a moth. Like, way better than almost any form of entertainment.
Yeah, I get really excited when I find a new butterfly or a moth, and I like have called my partner and he's like, "What's wrong?" And I'm like, "No, I'm just really excited."
And actually, the moths, from what I've been reading, that the moths are probably a lot more interesting than the butterflies overall. Yeah.
Maybe we'll have to learn more about each of them so we can make our compare and contrast. That's all the questions I have for you guys. Is there anything else you'd like to say for the summit?
So I am so thrilled that Wild Ones is establishing much closer to home. I like the idea of being a member, but I've been kind of like, oh, why am I a member? And so it's really exciting to have, and Wild Ones is a national organization. And so they're doing advocacy and they're doing all these things. And so I think that's great. And I do want to support that. So I appreciate having us closer to home.
Well, I was really excited to talk to both of you. And the only reason I probably got to is because I recently became the president of this chapter. So thank you for being here. I really did enjoy and love talking to both of you. It was a wonderful conversation.
All right. Thanks, Bobby. It was so nice to meet you. And yeah, excited to get more involved with Wild Ones, like now that it's closer to our area.
Thank you so much for spending this time with us and for being a part of this growing conversation. We hope this session leaves you feeling a little bit more connected to native plants, to the place we live, and to the community working right alongside you.